When I say Holy Family, what do you picture? Jesus, Mary, and Joseph are the Holy Family. But what if I ask you to picture a more generic idea of a Holy Family? Perfectly behaved kids sitting quietly in church, an immaculate home, a strict father surrounded by his solemn-faced wife and kids, praying the rosary with unbroken concentration. When I picture a Holy Family, I see a noisy family meal, the chaotic joy of Christmas morning, a family rosary punctuated by random noises from toys and children drifting back and forth between praying and playing. I see a father apologizing to his son for losing his temper, a husband and wife quietly hashing out what went wrong at the park that led to a total meltdown, a grieved mother trying to understand why her daughter is acting the way she is. I see a family going to Sunday Mass every week, except when serious illness or childbirth or something prevents them. And that happens sometimes. I see a family willing to miss out on some of the sporting events or whatever, willing to sometimes put the tech down and just be together. In other words, a holy family is not necessarily a perfect family. Even Jesus, Mary, and Joseph would not fit some definitions of that word, perfect. Despite the fact that one of them was completely without sin and the other was a righteous man, Mary and Joseph lost their son. It took them a whole day to even realize he was missing. Not that they did anything wrong, necessarily. It is a reasonable assumption that some aunt or uncle had him. But still, it wouldn't exactly look good on social media to say you lost your son for 3 whole days. But they are holy. God chose to become a child, to live life in a human family for that reason, to bring holiness to every human family. Even better, Jesus made it so that we can grow in holiness through our family. Not every person has access to a 24/7 prayer chat. Not every person has regular access to Mass, confession, or even to the Bible. But everyone has a family. Good, bad, or ugly. To exist as a human being means you came from a family. And thanks to Jesus Christ's choice to sanctify the human family, every human being has the option to grow in holiness through that fact. And I say good, bad, or ugly on purpose because so many of us do in fact have bad families, broken families, messy families. Perhaps our families are even gone, absentee, unknown to us. But they do exist. Like it or not, we came from our parents. And even if we never know them, that fact puts us in a position to practice gratitude and humility and acknowledging our existence depended on something other than ourselves. Whatever the case, family can be for us the instrument of sanctification, of becoming holier, which is the real key to lasting joy. How can that be? Because holiness comes through love, and families provide us the opportunity to love, whether they are good or bad. Any Catholic with siblings has had to go to confession and say, "Forgive me, Father, I fought with my sister," or "I resented my brother," or some variation on that theme. And one of my preferred penances for that confession is to have the child, or adult, pray a prayer of thanksgiving for that sibling. Why? Because that troublesome brother or sister is a chance to practice love in the form of patience and forgiveness and sacrifice and endurance. And I mean it quite literally when I say this, that your sibling gives you the chance to be holier. You drive me crazy, but thank God for making me grow in love. That principle applies to the whole family. As St. Paul puts it, the family is the place to practice heartfelt compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, bearing with one another, and forgiving one another. And yes, this applies to our interactions with everyone, but for the vast majority of human beings, it must be learned first in the family, in the home. Your parents and siblings are people you are forced to put up with, so that you can learn to choose to put up with, to love people that you could avoid, to become family to the rest of us. And this is why the church fights so hard to defend what we have always taught about the family. It is possible to be good coming from a broken or absent family, and many saints testify to this, but it is so much harder than it needs to be. The lessons that you are loved, that you have to share your life and your stuff with imperfect people, that you have an obligation to obey authority and to care for others, that you have a loving Father in heaven. These lessons and more are much more easily grasped when the family is intact. Family, man and woman in an exclusive lifelong union raising their children. This is not an invention of human culture or the government. It is not something that can be redefined, no matter what the people in Hollywood or Silicon Valley or Washington, D.C. want to say. Those of you who have been deprived of this are victims of a grave injustice. A person does not have the right to have a child, but every child has the right to their own mother and father, and they need both. Sadly, fatherlessness is a pandemic. A missing mother is just as tragic, but far less common. Is it any wonder that so many people reject God the Father when more than half the country grows up without a loving father? And I get it. Some of you may have already cringed at some of the things I've said, or thought of people who would be upset to hear it. Some of you may have cringed to that line in the second reading, "Wives, be subordinate to your husbands." But that cringe factor, as the kids might put it, that discomfort is exactly what I'm driving at. Our instinctive perspective on family life, even for the lucky few in healthy, intact families, our perspective is skewed by the rebellious, self-centered, individualistic culture that we live in. I cannot, in a single homily, lay out the full panoramic beauty of the church's teaching on family life. I'll leave some links in the homily when I post it. But what I want you to take away from this, for now, is that that beautiful vision does exist. And it is probably not what you see in our culture. The gospel is good news. And for most of us living today, the gospel vision of family really is new, despite being around for millennia. Being subordinate has always been a reciprocal thing in marriage. It's not the dystopian fever dream that you see in Handmaid's Tale. Living chastely, despite your attraction to the same sex, will not doom you to isolation, regardless of what the movies say. Having children isn't about hitting the right number, but about cooperation with God. Being obedient to your mother and father as a child actually makes you freer in the long run. Being faithful to someone who isn't faithful to you is not foolishness. Caring for your parents who have dementia will not rob you of a good life. In each case and more, there is always the option to have faith, to forgive, to persevere, to love, and to grow. Whatever your family situation, whatever brokenness that you have inherited or caused, it is not beyond God to work in the midst of that. Mary lost Jesus for 3 days, despite being without sin. She eventually found him in the temple. "Did you not know I must be in my Father's house?" We lost Jesus for 3 days because we crucified him with our sins. Of course, we sinners sometimes lose Jesus in the day-to-day of our broken and messy family life. But just as Jesus was found in the temple after 3 days, so he was raised from the dead on the third day. If you can shoulder the cross of family life, if you're willing to accept your weakness and search for Jesus, if you'll accept your adoption into the family of God, the family of the church, then you become the Father's house. And you'll discover that although you may not have always seen him, Jesus is here. And what does Jesus want for you? 2 things: to make you holy and to call you family.